Top 10 rockstar bands hated by other bands. Rock and roll isn't just about music. It's fueled by egos and intense rivalries. Bands like Muse and Radiohead, or Kurt Cobain and Pearl Jam, didn't just clash over sounds, but personal insults and commercial success. Why do some of rock's biggest names hate each other? Let's dig into the drama. 10th, Muse versus Radiohead. Muse and Radiohead are two of the biggest names in British alternative rock, but they've never exactly been friendly neighbors in the music world. Tom York, the frontman of Radiohead, has often accused Muse of mimicking his band's sound, especially in the early 2000s. The rivalry began around 2001 when York made his feelings known, calling out Muse for sounding too much like Radiohead. Over the years, York has become even more vocal about his disdain, with a notable moment in a 2019 interview where he slammed Muse's music for being overly familiar to his own band's work. On the flip side, Dominic Howard, Muse's drummer, recalled a heated encounter with York in 2010 that nearly turned physical.
Excuse for bullying and giving grief to other people. The lead singer of Radiohead walked off the stage at the band's Melbourne concert last night when one pro-Palestine...
The animosity between the bands only seems to have grown as time passes. What was once a comparison of contemporaries has turned into a full-fledged public feud, with York's sharp words fueling the fire. Dokuzunchu Duran Duran Karsha. Robert Smith, The Cure. Duran Duran and The Cure represent two vastly different sides of the 80s music scene. Duran Duran was all about polished pop. Robert Smith's The Cure embraced a darker, more melancholic side of rock. This divide is where their rivalry comes into play. Robert Smith has been outspoken about his disdain for Duran Duran's commercial success, often calling them a prime example of what's wrong with the music industry.
Robert stands still and plays his guitar. Our boy is a natural dancer.
In a 2018 interview with NME, Smith referred to Duran Duran as egregious, accusing them of catering to the masses and focusing more on image and commercial gain than artistic expression.
Cure Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees 2019. Are you as excited as I am?
By the sounds of it, no.
Oh no, what are we gonna do?
I'm sure we'll get there eventually. It's a bit early, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess it is. Maybe we just need...
For Smith, Duran Duran represented everything he disliked about the mainstream pop scene. Smith's anti-pop stance has been well documented throughout his career, and his criticisms of Duran Duran highlight this ideological divide. It's a battle between the commercial and the artistic, with Smith firmly standing on the side of the latter. 8. Led Zeppelin versus Pete Townshend, The Who. Led Zeppelin and The Who are two of the most iconic bands in rock history, and both had a massive impact on the 70s music scene. But Pete Townshend, guitarist of The Who, has never been shy about his dislike for Led Zeppelin. He has accused them of being imitators rather than innovators, claiming that his band essentially invented heavy metal. Townshend's frustration with Zeppelin has been well documented, especially when he argued that Jimmy Page and company were just copying The Who's sound. In a 2019 interview, Townshend even doubled down on his criticism, stating that Zeppelin's music lacked originality.
Of Led Zeppelin.
Well, it's very kind of you.
Well, my question, I want you to be reflective.
The tension between the bands goes beyond just musical preferences. It's about egos and a fierce desire to be recognized as the true pioneers of hard rock. Both bands helped shape rock and roll, but Townshend feels that The Who deserve more credit for the genre's evolution. 7. Green Day versus John Lydon, Sex Pistols, Peel. Green Day and John Lydon, also known as Johnny Rotten from the Sex Pistols, couldn't be more different in terms of their punk rock credentials. Green Day, while heavily influenced by the punk movement, embraced a more mainstream commercial sound, especially in the 90s and 2000s. John Lydon, on the other hand, has always been about keeping punk raw, rebellious, and as anti-commercial as possible. Lydon has never held back when it comes to expressing his dislike for Green Day, accusing them of being hypocrites and selling out for commercial gain. He's called them poor imitators of true punk rockers and has been vocal about his disdain for their commercial success.
Sorry
apologies
for
for the language.
Yeah,
Johnny,
sorry
can we
about
just focus on...
Focus on Johnny.
Well, this is it. Can we focus on...
Green Day's Billy Joe Armstrong has responded by accusing Lydon of being a vulture and only interested in promoting himself. It's a clash of punk ideologies, the raw anti-establishment spirit of Lydon versus Green Day's more polished, radio-friendly punk anthems. 6. Aerosmith versus Mick Jagger, Rolling Stones. Aerosmith and the Rolling Stones are two of rock's most iconic bands, but they've had their fair share of rivalry over the years. The most notable feud is between Steven Tyler of Aerosmith and Mick Jagger of the Stones. Jagger, who has always had a larger-than-life persona, has openly criticized Aerosmith for ripping off the Rolling Stones' stage presence.
Songwriter for the Rolling Stones and one of the most influential figures in rock and roll, the legendary Mick Jagger. Thank you very much.
Particularly Steven Tyler's over-the-top antics. Jagger has made no secret of his frustration with Aerosmith, especially in their early years when comparisons to the Stones were inevitable. In an interview, Jagger described Tyler as almost too bloody sweet, emphasizing the tension between the two legendary frontmen. Jagger's criticism of Aerosmith is part of his long-standing issue with bands that sought to replicate the Stones' iconic style. It's clear that Jagger feels a sense of ownership over the rock and roll image, and Aerosmith's attempts to mimic that image have rubbed him the wrong way. 5. The Monkees versus Jimi Hendrix. The Monkees were a pop band that started as a TV show concept, but quickly became one of the biggest pop acts of the 60s. Their music was catchy and easy to digest, which made them popular among a mainstream audience. On the other hand, Jimi Hendrix was a revolutionary guitarist known for his experimental and psychedelic sound. The two couldn't have been more different in terms of their approach to music. Hendrix had a famously low opinion of the Monkees' work, calling their music a national embarrassment. This harsh criticism came to a head in 1967 when Hendrix was on tour with the Monkees. Disenchanted by the pop nature of their songs, he left the tour midway, unable to stomach the contrast in musical integrity. Hendrix's rejection of the Monkees highlights the divide between authentic rock artistry and pop commercialization, a divide that was evident even in the 60s.
Jimi Hendrix opened for the Monkees. Nobody believes me. I'm not making that up. He really, really, truly did. So again,
4. Bikini Kill versus Courtney Love, Hole. The rivalry between Bikini Kill and Hole was one of the more intense and public feuds in the 90s alternative rock scene. Bikini Kill, led by Kathleen Hanna, represented the raw, feminist, punk ethos that defined riot grrrl music. Courtney Love's Hole, on the other hand, embodied the grunge movement's darker and more mainstream appeal. The feud began with a backstage confrontation in 1995, which escalated when Courtney Love publicly called Bikini Kill the biggest hoax in rock and roll. She criticized their music as amateurish and superficial, drawing a line between her own band's commercial success and Bikini Kill's underground reputation. The animosity spilled onto social media years later, keeping the feud alive.
Hello and welcome back. She's an American rock star, but Courtney Love says she feels most at home here in the UK and is even a fan, apparently. We'll ask her in a minute.
This rivalry is a perfect example of the pressures women in rock face, where competition often leads to personal and professional spats, especially when navigating fame in a male-dominated industry. 3. The Doors versus Jerry Garcia, Grateful Dead.
You know, he could remember how the music went, and so he would kind of tell us.
He said he thought of melodies to remember the words, and then he'd just sing it a cappella.
Both The Doors and The Grateful Dead were monumental in shaping the 60s counterculture, but their approaches to music were worlds apart. The Doors, led by the charismatic and often controversial Jim Morrison, embraced a dark, moody, and theatrical brand of psychedelia. The Grateful Dead, led by Jerry Garcia, were more about spontaneous improvisation and the communal experience of live performance, especially Morrison's persona and the band's brittle sound. He often criticized their overly polished approach, which he felt lacked the organic energy that the Grateful Dead thrived on. The tension between these two iconic bands reflects the differences in their approach to psychedelia, one focused on artistic depth and theatrics, the other on freedom, improvisation, and a more stripped-back sound. Second, Pearl Jam versus Kurt Cobain, Nirvana.
You know, it was like time-lapse photography, you know, by the end of the day, you've got a real... You're looking and tending to a healthy plant.
Yeah.
Pearl Jam and Nirvana were both pillars of the Seattle grunge scene, but their paths diverged dramatically when it came to their approach to fame and the grunge movement itself. Kurt Cobain, the frontman of Nirvana, was famously anti-commercial and believed that the grunge movement should stay underground and true to its roots. On the other hand, Pearl Jam, while undoubtedly a part of the same scene, embraced a more polished, radio-friendly sound that saw them achieve massive mainstream success. Cobain openly criticized Pearl Jam for being too polished and accused them of exploiting the grunge movement for commercial gain. In multiple interviews, Cobain called Pearl Jam posers and expressed his disdain for their classic rock influences. This tension highlighted a deeper conflict between maintaining the integrity of the grunge movement and achieving commercial success, with Cobain firmly on the side of the former. 1. The Beatles versus Lou Reed, The Velvet Underground. The Beatles and Lou Reed's The Velvet Underground were both groundbreaking in their ways, but Reed's relationship with the Beatles was anything but straightforward. Initially, Reed praised the Beatles, acknowledging their incredible songwriting abilities and influence on rock. However, as time went on, his opinion changed. He became increasingly critical of the band, even going as far as to call them pretentious and claiming that his work was far more sophisticated and artistic.
By Berlin.
Reed's comments about the Beatles' music were particularly biting, especially when he dismissed their later work as worse than stupid rock and roll. This feud wasn't just about music, it was about Reed's desire to be seen as a true innovator, not just a part of the pop culture machine that the Beatles had become. His criticisms highlight the tension between artistic integrity and mainstream success in the world of rock music. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.